Hi, fourth graders. This afternoon we're going to read the next chapter in Kensuke's Kingdom, and it is called Kensuke. If you remember, we left off yesterday. Michael had just gotten a fire started. I want you to think about why is it so important to him to get this fire started, right? What's the big deal with fire for Michael? And then I also want you to think about what Kensuke did, right? By putting it out. Okay, and I kind of gave it away. I know we talked yesterday about who the character was, and it is going to be Kensuke. So let's meet this Kensuke character. He was diminutive, no taller than me, and as old as a man as I'd ever seen. Diminutive, I can infer, just means smaller, right? Use those clues. No taller than me, so small. He wore nothing but a pair of tattered breeches, bunched at the waist, and there was a large knife in his belt. He was thin, too, in places under his arms, around his neck, and in his midriff. His copper-brown skin lay in folds about him, almost as if he'd shrunk inside it. What little hair he had on his head and his chin was long and wispy and white. I could see it at once that he was very agitated, his chin trembling, his heavily hooded eyes accusing and angry. Dameda! Dameda! He screeched at me. His whole body was shaking with fury. I backed away as he scuttled up the beach toward me, gesticulating wildly with his stick and haranguing me as he came. Ancient and skeletal he must have been, but he was moving fast, running almost. Dameda! Dameda! I had no idea what he was saying. It sounded Chinese or Japanese, maybe. I was about to turn and run when Stella, who strangely had not barked at all at him, suddenly left my side and went bounding off toward him. Her hackles were not up. She was not growling. To my astonishment, she greeted him like a long-lost friend. He was no more than a few feet away from me when he stopped. We stood looking at each other in silence for a few moments. He was leaning on his stick, trying to catch his breath. American, American, American? Ekjan? British? Yes, I said, relieved to have understood something at last. English. I'm English. It seemed to struggle for him to get the words out. No good. Fire no good. You understand? No fire. And then he seemed less angry now. But my mother, my father, they might see the smoke. It was plain, and it was plain that he didn't understand me. So I pointed out to sea by way of explanation. Out there. They're out there. They'll see the fire. They'll come and fetch me. Ah, so that's why he's using fire. That's why it's so important to him, this fire. Instantly, he became aggressive again. Dameda! He shrieked, waving his stick at me. No fire. I thought for a moment he was going to attack me, but he did not. Instead, he began to rake through the sand at my feet with his stick. He was drawing the outline of something, jabbering incomprehensibly all the time. It looked like some kind of a fruit at first, a nut, perhaps a peanut, and now I understood. It was a map of the island. When it was done, he fell on his knees beside it and piled up mounds of the sands, one at each end, the two hills. Then, very deliberately, he etched out a straight line, top to bottom, cutting the smaller end of the island off from the larger one. You boy, you here, he said, pointing back toward my cave at the end of the beach. You. He stabbed his finger in the mound of sand that was my hill. Then across the whole of the sand map, he began to write something. The lettering was not letters at all, but symbols, all kinds of sticks and pyramids and crosses and horizontal lines and slashes and squiggles, and he wrote it all backwards in columns from right to left. He sat back on his haunches and tapped his chest. Kensuke, Kensuke, my island. And he brought his hand down sharply like a chopper, separating the island in two. Kensuke here. You boy, here. I was already in no doubt as to what he meant. Suddenly he was on his feet again, waving me away with his stick. Go, boy. No fire. Dameda. No fire. You understand? I did not argue, but walked away at once. When after a while I dared to look back, he was kneeling down beside what was left of my fire and scooping still more sand onto it. Stella had stayed with him. I whistled for her, and she came, but not at once. I could see she was reluctant to leave him. She was behaving very oddly. Stella, Stella Artois had never taken kindly to strangers. Never. I felt disappointed in her, a bit betrayed even. When I looked back, the fire was not smoking at all. It had been completely smothered, and the old man was nowhere to be seen. For the rest of the day, I stayed in my cave. For some reason, I felt safe there. I suppose I had already begun to think of it as home. I had no other. I felt as an orphan must feel, abandoned and alone in the world. I was frightened. I was angry. I was completely bewildered. I sat there trying to gather my thoughts. So far as I could tell, though, I couldn't be sure of it. There were only two of us on the island, the old man and me. In which case, it stood to reason that only he could have left me the fish and the bananas and the water. Surely that had been an act of kindness, a sign of friendship, welcome. And yet now this same man had banished me to one end of the island as if I were a leper, and made it quite clear that he never wanted us to meet again. And all because I had lit a fire. None of it made any sense at all, unless he was just out of his mind. I took a long, hard look at my situation. I was marooned on an island in the middle of nowhere, very probably with a madman for company, and a bunch of howling monkeys, at least one orangutan among them, and God knows what else might be hidden in that forest. Then millions of mosquitoes that would eat me alive every night. I knew only one thing. I had to get away. But how? How was I ever going to get off this island unless I could attract the attention of some passing by ship? I could be here for the rest of my life. The thought didn't bear dwelling on. I wondered how long the old man had been on the island and what might have brought him in here in the first place. Who was he? And who was he and who was he anyway to tell me what I could and could not do? And why had he put out my fire? I curled up in my cave, closed my eyes, and just wished myself back home or back on the Peggy Sue with my mother and father. Such wonderful dreaming almost lulled me to sleep, but the mosquitoes and the howling of the forest soon dragged me back to consciousness to face once again all the appalling implications of my wretched predicament. It came to me suddenly that I had seen the old man's face somewhere before. I had no idea how that could be. As I lay there pondering this, I felt the piece of glass in my pocket pressing into my hip. My spirits were suddenly lifted. I still had my fire glass. I would build my fire again, but this time somewhere he wouldn't discover it. I would wait for a ship to come, and then until then I could survive. The old man had survived in this place. If he could, I could, and I could do it alone too. I didn't need him. Okay. So that's where we're going to stop today, but I want you to think about what was the big event that happened today in the story. So you could write about what Kensuke did, right? And so this is in your seesaw assignment, and then check the blue box when you're all done. All right, we'll figure out how the next few days goes for Michael now that we know he's not alone on the island. All right, make sure you finish all 3 pages in this assignment today in Seesaw this afternoon, and remember, no checkout. Let's have a fantastic rest of your afternoon. I'll see you guys in the morning. Bye-bye.